Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, the federal government remains shuttered. How is Utah grappling with the shutdown? What impact is it having on tourism? What about the economy? And what will it take for leaders to strike a deal? Utah's legislative session is quickly approaching. What issues will be considered? How will they affect Utahns? What will be the sleeper issues? And what are new leaders doing to set themselves apart?
Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Natalie Gochner, Director of the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, Spencer Stokes, President of Stokes Strategies, and Scott Howell, former Democratic State Senator. So glad to have you all with us. Let's jump right into the issue on so many people's minds. We are 21 days into a federal government shutdown. We officially tied the longest historical closing of our government. And before we get into the why and the solution, Natalie, we'll start with you. Let's talk about the impacts. I mean, there's nationally, but the state of Utah in particular, because it does impact us.
It does. We are a state that is more dependent on the federal government than the average. That's because of installations like Hill Air Force Base, the Ogden IRS Center, and certainly because we're a public land state. National Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, all of these employees contribute to our economy. I believe the number is about 10,000 federal employees that are furloughed in our state right now. That's incredibly disruptive to have them, not working. I think people should think about businesses and families when you think about the shutdown, because it affects businesses and it affects families. And the truth is, if it lasts a week, no big deal.
Spencer,
but when it lasts a month, then it starts to be measurable.
Sadly, it shouldn't even be lasting a week. We're in a situation in our country where these kinds of things are happening more and more regularly, and it shows the dysfunction of government. Look, the federal employees are going to get back pay. It's sad that they're not being paid for the service they're doing now, and today's the first day that many of them are going to go to their mailbox or their banking checking account, and they're going to find out that that paycheck isn't there. So that's terribly frustrating, but it's the people I call outside the gate. We refer to this up at Hill Air Force Base. There's the people behind the gate and there's the people outside of the gate that are not being paid for the contract work they're doing. And that's got to be terribly frustrating with them. But when you have lines drawn in the sand and you have this kind of government where we are absolutely not going to move, you can't really do anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Scott. We got to talk about this impasse, because what it seems, the president gave a speech, the Democrats gave a response almost immediately, and none of that seemed to be indicating that they might find a solution. Why are they so entrenched on this when it seems like so many people are saying, just find a compromise?
I agree with Natalie and Spencer on this issue. It has completely left the realm of reality. It's the families and it's the workers, it's the business that are associated. And Spencer being from up north, he probably sees it more and feels it. But it's this whole notion of this tribalism that continues to flow through government. It's not looking at what's best for us, it's looking at what's best for them. And I blame both sides. They both have responsibility on this. And Boyd Matheson had an interesting piece the other day about talking, why can't we each give a little bit to make it better for everyone? And I've seen that all completely lost. Spencer's been around when I was up on the Hill. We negotiated things with Natalie, with Mike Levitt. Yeah. I've had Natalie in my office saying, now, if you'll work on this, Scott, we'll do this. And I just don't see that anymore. I don't know why.
Yeah, the legislative body is a body of compromise. It has to be. because you have so many people. And one of the things I've been saying, people ask me all the time, what's a solution to this? When you have 104 legislators like we do in Utah, that's small enough numbers that you can sit down, you can work through it. But when you have 535 people, it's just too many. You go into a caucus of 220 people. How do you ever get compromise out of that kind of a group?
Well, but I have to just, compromise, I like talking about compromise, but I think we should be talking about facts.
Yeah.
Okay? Because when people have different sets of facts, they don't come to compromise. And on this issue, facts are not on the table.
How silly of you to even be thinking we should be talking about facts. I mean,
the smartest woman in our state.
Talking about facts, honestly, has gone out the window, and it is sad.
Yeah, so imagine what happened, right? A president did a national address, and is talking about a crisis that is not a crisis. And I'm happy to debate that with both of you, but
why would I debate it? I mean, it's the truth.
The opioid problem's a crisis.
Yes.
The rising debt is a crisis. Incivility and dysfunction in Washington's a crisis. The southern border is not a crisis. It's better there right now than it's been in a long time.
Well, the facts show that, especially on the people who've come across. And when the president was talking about these 3 individuals that were killed and they caused so much, right here in Utah, within the last 90 days, we've had 2 police officers that have been shot, white male, and shot by males. And I just think to myself, that's the real crisis. Yeah. You know, how do we protect our communities? And I think it was a pledge. The president is really bright. If you listen to how he did his speech, and I learned this from Mike Leavitt. Mike Leavitt was one of the greatest orators ever.
Mike Leavitt?
No. But they had the same techniques. Think about how many times in terms of getting the audience, Democrat, evil. Democrat causing these people to get killed. Democrat. He said that all the time on his planet. That goes out to the general public, and then everybody thinks, oh, those Democrats are so evil.
What's amazing to me is that there hasn't been a shutdown until this point. So if you talk about timing of building the wall and a shutdown, there have been plenty of opportunities for the president in the last 2 years to bring the federal government to a screeching halt. Many CRs have been done up to this point. Many opportunities to talk about the wall and to shut it down. It's interesting that he's waited until he's in cycle, 2 years now, to go into the shutdown mode, and he's got to do something.
What do you think about that comment on the timing, Natalie? Because, you know, it's interesting. Continuing resolutions have happened for a long time, and if you put it through the lens that you just gave us, which many would say there's not a crisis. All right. So, what do you think about the timing of this, particularly when he's looking at potentially declaring a state of emergency, a national emergency?
Well, I think on this we can go to Senator Romney's op-ed in the Washington Post, where he talked about how the president had a bad December, how people were leaving the administration, and things appear to be falling apart. That's at least the way I would interpret it. So, what do you do when you're losing control? You create something like this, and I watched the speech, and I'm sure the two of you did.
Sure.
But I just thought, how is it that we are preempting, the normal American life to put on air a president that's not using, factual information, and then the Democratic response I didn't like either. That American Gothic kind of
Grant Wood's
painting.
famous painting. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing I did like, and this is where I think we should transition to, is I liked that Senator Schumer said, let's separate the shutdown from the border patrol, the border security issue. So why wouldn't you you've done this, Spencer, why wouldn't you create a Gang of 8 to deal with the border security, open the government, give the Gang of 8 30 days to come up with some great solutions, a compromise, and get it done?
Well, you can do that if the Speaker of the House won't say just completely close out any kind of wall. As we said earlier, I believe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I believe there's areas that probably do need some border security in the form of wall. I believe there's other areas that we need more electronic surveillance. It's proven that all the drugs are coming through the border crossings. People aren't crawling in with bags of drugs. That's coming in a large measure through the border security. So, for me, I wouldn't. If I were Donald Trump, I don't know that he has enough faith that they would talk about the wall if he moves off this position. And I think that's what's happened here.
Let's talk about a quote from Mike Lee about this very issue on the wall to see how this separates. And this is kind of how he analyzes it, but I'm curious what you all have to say. He said, President Clinton built a wall. President Bush built a wall. And even President Obama built a wall. Walls work. Let's come together, give the Department of Homeland Security the money they need to address this crisis and end the shutdown. So, Spencer, you worked for the senator for a really long time, too.
It's a sane approach. Senator Lee is a bright United States senator, knows that the shutdown is not good. Like I just said, he's saying there's truth somewhere in the middle. But the thing that I want to address, and Natalie knows this because she worked in a department, there are very bright, competent people in departments. And if you said to Homeland Security, come back to us with a proposal of what you think the border crossing, the border agents need, there'd be some point to discuss this. But nobody wants to actually go to the people who know and have them come back with a solid proposal.
And that's because the president laid down the wall as a symbol to be elected, and it's a symbol that's not based on evidence. It's based on emotion. I'll give you a couple of interesting ways to think of that. One of the best ways you can help with illegal immigration is to help Mexico prosper. He's not done that. He's hurt Mexico. Another thing you can do is recognize that most of our immigration problem comes through legal crossings that overstay their visas.
And that needs to be fixed.
Yeah,
we need to fix that.
And that doesn't have anything to do with the wall. So the president made the wall seem like the solution as a symbol to his base, but in reality, it's so much more complex than that. And we are reasonable people. We can figure it out.
Yeah. Scott, maybe take a moment on that very issue, whether or not the wall, it was a campaign promise, but it's also symbolic. Is this shutdown even about the wall now, or is this something much bigger than that?
It's all political. It's appealing to a base, which Spencer, both of you has acknowledged. He's starting to lose some gravitas, and he needs to have this to go back into the cycle. But it's a very sad thing. Look, I was all in when he said Mexico would pay for it. I was all in. That's great. Let them build it. But so that's why I'm disappointed. But Spencer hit right on it. If you talk to Border Patrol people, and I have a cousin who's in a leadership position, and I'd take that $5 billion and have more points of entry where we could really do a deep dive on every car that comes through. But we can't do that now because you'd have to leave on a Friday to get home on Tuesday if we did a deep dive. But Spencer's right. We need to build some more point of entries down there. We can keep flow going. But when we find that vehicle, and Natalie, you said this, it's the drugs that they put underneath the dash and how they hide them and all that. That's what we need to do, and that's where we need to invest. But he's got a base out there, and he's really performing for his base right now.
Well, we labeled the Obama administration, his key signature piece of legislation was Obamacare. There are people who think that's what it is. I guess we'll call this Donald Trump. Put wall in Donald. I don't know, but
starting that phrase now.
Yeah, but Donald Trump.
Isn't it interesting? All three of us, different political backgrounds, that we can all see the light at the end of the tunnel of what needs to happen. And the number one concern is not getting reelected, it's what's doing right for the citizens. And that's really what it is at the end of the day. Dealing with facts and then having logical decisions on this.
So open the government and create a path to a compromise.
One more solution the president is talking about, I think we need to address, though, is declaring this national emergency. Spencer, Mitt Romney's already said, I don't like that, bad precedent. All right, talk about what the ramifications of the president doing that now and going forward.
Well, we've seen, because of the dysfunction of Congress, and no one can get on the same page, we've seen really this start with the Obama administration through executive order and really doing by a single fiat by the president declaring something. This is actually the next step further, which I think sets us down a dangerous path, and that is that the president can just move resources to a policy that they like by the stroke of a pen. And we've held these kinds of emergency declarations for true emergencies, hurricanes, flooding, terrorism,
all those.
And to move it to this, I think, is really a step too far. However, Lindsey Graham says, I don't really care what he does. He needs to end the shutdown. And the problem is you have if I were to pick the two most stubborn people in the entire United States of America, it would be Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump. How do you negotiate with two people like that?
Very interesting point. Before we leave Congress, Natalie, Rob Bishop in the paper, everyone reporting he's maybe a finalist for the Secretary of the Interior.
Yeah, I think that would be terrific for our state. He has the background, knows the public land issues. We are very important in the interior world, and I think it would be terrific for our state. I hope the president does that. It'd be one of the first things the president would do that I'd be really excited about.
And has actually worked through with all sides on these kinds of lands issues, and
a great
I think
way
he's
to end his career.
proven he can compromise and negotiate.
Go ahead, Scott.
The former speaker, when I was a freshman, he was in there, and we worked really well together. We always have. And I want to give a big shout out to Senator Romney. I think Mitt has had the courage to stand up to do the right things with the president. Now, I can tell you from a party perspective, when you do things like that, you take a lot of shots. The hate mail is unbelievable when you step out of that lane, and especially if people think that you're not loyal to the party anymore. But Mitt, I'm glad that he's back there, because he's well respected by everyone, in the majority of everyone. And I think what he said about the president, and Natalie made reference to his op-ed in this morning's front page of the paper, that he thought it was a terrible strategy for the president to go down to the border. And I just think that Mitt is really doing what he should be doing, looking out for the best interests of the citizens.
And it's a great time to write that kind of op-ed, because his phones aren't installed yet, and his email servers don't work. So all that negativity is just going out there into a big trash pile. So
That's the voice of experience. Talking about that right there. Okay, I want to talk about this next legislative session, because Mike Lee has weighed in a little bit on a very interesting issue that is back. Senate Bill 54. This was the opportunity to gather signatures to get on the ballot instead of necessarily going through the caucus convention system. All of you have been involved in this issue for such a long time. So Scott, we're going to start with you on this, right? Mike Lee, right at the governor,
right,
even to the lieutenant governor, right? Says, abandon this law.
Well, I was really interested when he called out Spencer. I think that fueled the fire to say, and Spencer will probably know this answer, is he going to run for governor? But when he took on Lieutenant Governor Cox and said, where do you stand on that? It was pretty significant that he is making a stance here. But for a Democrat, we just sit back and go, yeah, that's great. You guys, keep that going. Yeah, pro-signature, anti-signature.
Look, I think Senator Lee has a lot of faith in the United States Supreme Court. And he's a constitutional law expert. And I think what the senator is saying is, let's just let them either solve it or not solve it. Let it be the definitive answer on this. If they don't take it up, then we know what the definitive answer is. If they take it up and hear it and rule, we know what the definitive answer on it is. And I think once, my bigger issue is that the Republican Party of Utah is controlled by one large donor who said, I will pay and bail you out if you will continue pushing this to the United States Supreme Court. If you want to get right at the heart of things, there's one person who is funding all of this. And so the party was obliged. They basically were blackmailed into pushing it to the Supreme Court, because otherwise they wouldn't have had their debt paid off.
And what's interesting about it is Governor Leavitt, who I have total respect for, and we had a great relationship.
Earlier you compared him to Donald Trump.
Well, no,
Go ahead and put that aside.
in the way that he's a great speaker, he creates illusion. That's what I meant. I'm glad you gave me an opportunity to correct that. But Mike has laid out all his capital on this, political capital. I mean, it's such a critical issue. And Mike sees the bigger picture, and he understands it.
May I paint the bigger picture?
Yes,
Talking
please.
Mike Leavitt.
Can I take the time to just do that?
Leavitt.
Well,
Leavitt,
just
excuse me.
70% of the public support this
Yes.
reform, so signatures to get on the ballot. It's working. It's creating more choice, more competition, more engagement, greater voter turnout. And then the third, and I think this is the most important point, the legislature is absolutely conflicted on this issue. It is a point of integrity to me that the public should decide how we elect people, and don't let this be done up on Capitol Hill, where all these people are conflicted because they're elected through that process.
So what do you make of the fact that Dan McKay, who sponsored this legislation, is now saying he'll run a bill this session to repeal it?
Yeah, I think Dan's in a difficult, or Senator McKay's in a difficult situation, because he sponsored the original bill in the House, and then it has been turmoil, and it has created a civil war in the Republican Party. And so I understand where he's coming from, but I think a lot of us need to get together and talk about what's the right way to elect people in this state, and should we modernize the system, or should we stay with the way it's been that has had so many problems?
And you're walking these candidates, these people who want to run for higher political office are walking a very fine line right now, because it is before the Supreme Court. They are going to determine whether or not they're going to take it up. What happens if they take it up and rule that it is unconstitutional? All of these people who are wanting to run for office, my point is they're walking this
There's a
line.
way to, basically every state has signatures to get on the ballot. We can do this legally. We just got to make the reforms and whatnot that need to happen. So I think there is a path forward.
They're conflicted, but right now it's sitting squarely in front of the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
think
a wait
they decide
and
to
see.
take it
And
up.
I think the likelihood is they won't take it up, but I do also think the likelihood is that the legislature will be so tempted to repeal it. And that's where I think the problem is.
It's so interesting listening to both of you.
Two Republicans over here fighting.
The right thing to do is just what you said, Natalie, is give the opportunity for all citizens to participate in the democratic process. And that's what it is. And Spencer said something so interesting. At one time, the Democratic Party was really controlled by just a very small 2 or 3 individuals who did all the money. And it's sad that money has gotten into even these party politics at that level, that they would control that. And that's the saddest thing about what's happened, because neither party could afford to defend or support this initiative. I mean, how many millions of dollars have been spent on SB 254? I mean, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Spencer, I want to hit the Mike Lee for a second, because he did get signatures, right? He's saying get rid of this thing, but he did get signatures. Maybe talk about that for a second, and then I just wonder if you can comment on some comments I get. Maybe his position on this is reflecting maybe either his intention maybe to run for governor, or maybe to get on the Supreme Court.
I don't think there has ever been, and I've had many, as you can imagine, many discussions with Senator Lee. It would be a huge change in plans if he decided he was going to run for governor. That's never been a discussion. He loves what he's doing now. He said he likes to vote. When they ask him about I like to go over and vote. He has a 100% voting record. I don't think the Supreme Court is, that is something that is such a crapshoot for him. I think really what he's saying is he loves the Supreme Court. He's a constitutional scholar. This can be over definitively, and we can move on after this happens, and drop the support of it before the court. But it is going to be a divisive issue for the next foreseeable future. It will probably put our 2020 process really is going to hang in the balance. But the fact of the matter is, there was a day, as Scott was saying, when Republican leaders in the state cared deeply about the party and made sure that the party was on a solid foundation and path. And that day has long since passed. I can give you lots of reasons why I think it happened, but the leaders and the donors and the influential people in this state have really walked away from the Republican Party because of this issue. And it's probably happened some in the Democratic Party.
Makes a great point. The far left and the far right have hijacked what was the core Democrat and Republican in the past. Democrats and Republicans in the past worked together. They did create a gang of 5 to go figure out what to do. They did say, we'll compromise here, we'll work with you on that. But those days are gone. And it's that far, far left and far, far right.
But I see that it's gone at the federal level. At the state level, we still solve a ton of problems.
We do.
We do have this
but I'm
party
worried.
problem.
Yeah,
but in the policy level, we do a lot of great things. And I would just say to Senator Lee and others, look at the merits of what we've done with election modernization in this state. There's more people running for office. There's greater voter turnout. There's more
My favorite
choice,
thing, though,
more
is
competition.
that he tweeted it in Spanish. That was one of my favorite
that true?
things.
I didn't
yeah.
know
Yes,
that.
he did. Yeah. So, did Spencer Cox ever reply back to him where he stood on it?
Because he speaks Spanish.
Yeah, he does.
I don't know.
But I did not
don't
see
know.
the response either.
Yeah, either did I.
Okay, Spencer, I wanted to just hear from Ollie for just a moment. Sleeper issues for this session starts on the 28th, so we are about there. All right, well over 1,000 bills already filed. All right, we don't know all those are, but we know there's a huge number of them. Spencer, what are you seeing coming that could be really interesting this session?
Well, I think the taxation issue is going to be big. The governor's proposed sales tax change, but it also have proposed taxation of services. Those two items, I think, combined are going to occupy a lot of time. There are a lot. When you say sleeper issues, I always say it's all the things that the Democrats want to push. Those are all the sleeper issues,
And they don't push it very far.
You know, clean air, housing, homelessness. There are all of these things that are major issues in the legislature or for our state, and they don't seem to get the attention and sometimes the attention of the media. They don't get covered.
Natalie, maybe take a second on this tax issue, because all the legislators I know come to you for the advice on these issues. Talk about that for just a moment.
Governor Herbert's done something very bold. He's recognized that we have a sales tax system that's not keeping pace with the economy. In a great economy like we have right now, it's not a huge problem, but when the economy turns, it will be a big problem, and so you need to solve it when you have a strong economy. He's proposed to lower the rate, give a big tax cut, and broaden the base, and it is the magic of public finance, because it's a more fair system, a more efficient system, and it will be sustainable.
How's it being received?
Well, I think there's a mix. I think the legislature will give a larger tax cut than the governor's proposed. He's at $200 million. I think they'll give more. But I think in Speaker Wilson, we have someone who understands long-term trends, and I'm optimistic. And that's big. That's saying something big, because tax policy is hard to change.
Very hard.
Okay, final word, Scott.
This is going to sound interesting, but as a former legislator, it was so difficult to appropriate dollars when we had surpluses versus when we didn't, because everybody wants a piece of that money, and they all think, oh, I just need this piece. But then what happens is the following year, it's not ongoing, and so they're back there to get that.
Okay, that's going to have to be the final word. Thank you so much for your insights today. Well, that's it for the Hinckley Report. To watch more of this panel, please join us online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you and good night.